Ground invasion of Iran is worse than we all expected, because what's happening right now isn't just another night of airstrikes. It's 11 nights straight of the most intense bombing campaign since this all began. And tonight, something changed. The targets weren't random anymore. They were hitting command centers, leadership, the exact people who would give the order to run. And now, intelligence is pointing to one word, a word nobody wanted to hear. Invasion. Ground forces, American boots, or someone else's. And if that happens, and what comes next, will not look like anything we've seen in this war so far. Stay with us, because by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly what's coming and why it's worse than anyone expected. Welcome back to the channel, everybody. Before we get into it, if you're one of those wonderful people who's been with us for a while now, watching every night, following this war as it unfolds, you know who you are. Do us a small favor, would you? Tap that subscribe button. It costs nothing, it takes half a second, and it means the world to us. Think of it like signing the guest book on your way in, so we know you're part of the family here. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from tonight? Which city? Which country? We love knowing just how far this reaches. Now, let's get into it. It was July 23rd, 2026, and the war over Iran had just entered a new and dangerous phase. For 11 straight nights, the skies above Iran had lit up with explosions. But something about the latest round of strikes felt different. Analysts watching the footage closely noticed a pattern that had not been there before. The strikes began at 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time, launched by U.S. Central Command. Within hours, video began circulating online, showing massive fireballs rising from the Iranian landscape. These were not random hits. They were precise, deliberate, and aimed at very specific locations. Locations tied directly to Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, known as the IRGC. What made these particular strikes stand out was their target. Analysts identified the locations as IRGC drone storage sites and underground drone networks. For months, the IRGC had proudly shown off these facilities in propaganda videos, boasting about their growing drone capabilities. Now, those same facilities were being reduced to rubble. Military observers described the explosions as looking like fireworks, bright, violent, and unmistakable in their intent. But the drone facilities were only part of the story. Further footage showed direct hits on what appeared to be IRGC headquarters buildings. This was a critical shift. Striking headquarters meant striking the brain of the operation, the people who gave orders, tracked movements, and decided what happened next. When a military loses its command and control, it does not just lose equipment. It loses the ability to think and react as one unit. This is where the story became more urgent. Alongside the headquarters strikes, U.S. forces also targeted locations along the border between Iran and Iraq. Analysts believe this served two purposes. First, it disrupted supply routes and troop movements. Second, and perhaps more importantly, it closed off potential escape routes for IRGC hardliners and senior leaders who might try to flee the country as pressure mounted. Put together, these three elements, the drone network destruction, the headquarters strikes, and the border closures, painted a clear picture. This was not a scattered bombing campaign. This looked like a coordinated effort to dismantle Iran's military leadership from the top down while making sure no one could simply run away from the consequences. And that raised a bigger question, one that was quickly spreading through defense circles and newsrooms alike. If the goal was truly to eliminate Iran's command structure, what would come after the bombs stopped falling? Airstrikes alone cannot occupy territory. They cannot capture leaders hiding in bunkers. They cannot secure a country. For that, history has shown, something else is usually required. Boots on the ground. Whispers began to grow louder. Was the United States preparing for a ground invasion? The signs, when placed side by side, seemed to point in that direction. The scale of the bombing campaign was already being compared to the opening days of the war, when the conflict first began. 11 nights of this intensity was no small thing. It suggested planning, patience, and purpose. Inside government circles, few were willing to say the word invasion out loud. But the silence itself spoke volumes. When officials refuse to rule something out, it often means the option is very much alive. And for a country already reeling from 11 nights of destruction, the idea that ground forces might follow was not just a rumor anymore. It was becoming a real possibility that military planners, world leaders, and ordinary citizens alike would soon have to face. What came next would depend on decisions being made in rooms far from public view. But one thing was already clear. The war over Iran was no longer just being fought in the skies. It was inching, night by night, closer to the ground. If Part 1 showed the world what was being destroyed, Part 2 asked a harder question. Why was it being destroyed in this particular order? To understand what might come next, analysts began looking not at the explosions themselves, but at the pattern hiding behind them. Military strategists often say that bombs tell a story before soldiers ever arrive. And in this case, the story being told was one of containment. Strikes along the Iraq-Iran border were not simply about cutting supply lines. They appeared to serve a second, quieter purpose, sealing off an escape route. If senior IRGC commanders wanted to slip out of the country under the cover of chaos, that path was slowly being closed off, piece by piece. This detail mattered more than it seemed at first glance. Throughout history, military campaigns that intend to occupy or dismantle a regime tend to isolate leadership before making their next move. Cutting off the ability to flee is often one of the earliest signs that a much larger operation is being prepared. It was not proof of an invasion, but it was the kind of clue that experienced observers do not ignore. Then came the words, not from generals, but from the very top of the U.S. government. Statements from the administration hinted, without saying so directly, that something significant was on the horizon. Language like this rarely appears by accident. Governments choose their words carefully, especially during wartime, and vague warnings of something big often serve as a deliberate signal, both to the public at home and to adversaries watching closely abroad. But perhaps the most telling detail of all came from comments suggesting that ground engagements might not fall entirely on American shoulders. References to partner nations potentially stepping in raised an entirely new layer of questions. Was the United States trying to build a coalition before any ground movement began? Was this an attempt to share the burden, the risk, and the political cost of what might follow? This ambiguity was not a weakness in the messaging. It was, in many ways, the message itself. Modern warfare is no longer only fought with weapons. It is also fought with uncertainty. When a government refuses to confirm or deny its next move, it forces the opposing side to prepare for every possibility at once. Iran's military planners could not know for certain whether they were facing American forces alone, a coalition of allies, or some combination of both. That uncertainty, by itself, stretches resources thin and creates hesitation. Taken individually, none of these signals proved that a ground invasion was coming. Strikes near a border could simply be about supply routes. Vague statements could simply be political caution. Talk of partner nations could simply be diplomatic language. But when layered together, a pattern began to form, one that experienced analysts found difficult to dismiss as coincidence. This is often how major military decisions reveal themselves before they are announced, not through a single dramatic statement, but through a series of smaller moves that only make sense when viewed as a whole. The border strikes, leadership targeting from part one, and now these political signals were beginning to fit together like pieces of a puzzle that pointed in one direction. And so, the world was left watching closely, waiting to see whether these scattered signals would soon combine into something undeniable. Because if a ground invasion truly was being prepared, the next question would not be whether it happens. It would be who leads it, and what kind of force would be needed to support it once it began. Every ground invasion needs more than soldiers. It needs eyes in the sky, firepower that can react in seconds, and specialists who know how to move quietly before the main force ever arrives. And when analysts began mapping out what a ground campaign into Iran might actually look like, one aircraft kept appearing at the top of every list, the A-10 Thunderbolt. Built decades ago for exactly this kind of mission, the A-10 was never designed to be fast or flashy. It was designed to fly low, fly slow, and stay close to soldiers on the ground when they needed help the most. Unlike modern jets built for speed and long-range strikes, the A-10 exists for one purpose: protecting troops in direct contact with the enemy. If a ground invasion of Iran ever began, military planners would almost certainly want this aircraft flying overhead. At the heart of the A-10 sits its most famous feature, a massive rotating cannon known as the GAU-8 Avenger. This weapon fires large rounds made of depleted uranium at a staggering rate, capable of tearing through armored vehicles in seconds. Soldiers who have heard it fire often describe the sound as a long, low burp, rather than individual gunshots, simply because it fires so fast, the human ear cannot separate the shots. For any IRGC convoy caught in the open, that sound would likely be the last thing they ever heard. But air support alone does not win a ground campaign. It only clears the path. On the ground itself, specialized units would take on a very different kind of role. Analysts pointed to America's most elite forces as the likely backbone of any invasion. Units like the 82nd Airborne and 101st Airborne Divisions, along with Green Berets, Navy SEALs, and Delta Force operators. These are not ordinary soldiers. Their training focuses heavily on gathering intelligence, understanding enemy movement, and striking before the enemy can react. In a campaign against the IRGC, their primary goal would likely be locating command structures and predicting missile launches before they happen, rather than simply engaging in open combat. In modern warfare, stopping an attack before it starts is often more valuable than responding after the fact. This combination, air power above and specialized forces on the ground, represents what modern military planners often call a layered approach. The A-10 and its cannon would handle immediate threats and protect advancing troops. Meanwhile, elite units would work to dismantle the enemy's ability to organize, communicate, and strike back. Together, they form a system built not just to defeat an opposing army, but to prevent it from functioning as one in the first place. This is precisely why any hint of ground engagement in this conflict draws such serious attention from military analysts. A ground invasion is never just about numbers of soldiers crossing a border. It is about the machinery built to support them, the aircraft flying overhead, and the specialized teams working in the shadows before the main force ever takes a single step. And if this machinery truly was being prepared, as many of the earlier signals suggested, then the scale of what could unfold inside Iran would be far greater than airstrikes alone could ever achieve. The skies had already delivered 11 nights of destruction. But should this next phase begin, the ground itself would become the new battlefield, supported by some of the most advanced tools and highly trained personnel the United States military has ever built. While American military planners quietly prepared their options, Iran's government chose to respond in the way it often does during moments of crisis, through words rather than silence. This week, Iran's foreign ministry spokesperson addressed reporters directly, and his message carried a tone that surprised many who were watching closely. He stated that Iran's leadership was, in his words, counting down the minutes to welcome a ground invasion. At first glance, this statement might sound like simple defiance, the kind of tough talk governments often use to project strength during wartime. But analysts examining the situation more carefully saw several possible explanations hiding behind those words, and each one told a very different story about where this conflict might be heading. The first possibility is genuine confidence. It is possible that Iran's leadership truly believes a ground invasion would work in their favor. Fighting on home soil offers certain advantages, including familiarity with the terrain, shorter supply lines, and the ability to draw an invading force into difficult, costly engagements. If Iran's military planners believe they can turn a ground war into a prolonged and painful struggle for American and partner forces, then inviting that fight openly could be a calculated strategy rather than empty bravado. The second possibility is that this statement functions as a negotiating tactic. By appearing unafraid, even eager, for a ground invasion, Iran's government may be attempting to shift the psychological balance of the conflict. Projecting fearlessness can sometimes discourage an opponent from committing fully, especially if that opponent expected to see signs of desperation instead. In this reading, the statement is less about the battlefield and more about the negotiating table, an attempt to appear strong enough that continuing the war seems less appealing than ending it. The third possibility is more troubling: miscalculation. History offers no shortage of examples where a government misjudged the strength, patience, or capability of its opponent, only to face consequences far worse than expected. If Iran's leadership genuinely underestimates what a coordinated air and ground campaign, backed by advanced aircraft and elite forces, could bring, then this bold statement may end up looking very different in hindsight. Whichever explanation proves correct, this moment cannot be separated from everything that came before it. 11 nights of sustained bombing, the destruction of drone networks, direct strikes on IRGC headquarters, and strategic movements along the Iraq border all set the stage for this exact moment. Iran's declaration did not arrive in isolation. It arrived as a direct response to a campaign that has already reshaped much of its military infrastructure. This raises the central question hanging over the entire conflict. Is a ground invasion still avoidable, or has this war already crossed a point where such a move feels inevitable? Some analysts argue that the intensity and precision of recent strikes suggest ground operations are simply the next logical step. Others caution that air power alone, no matter how devastating, does not automatically lead to invasion, and that political leaders may still choose to rely on continued air pressure instead. What remains certain is the scale of what a ground invasion would represent. This would not simply be another chapter in an already lengthy air campaign. It would mark a fundamental shift, moving the conflict from the skies above Iran to the streets, deserts, and cities below. Advanced aircraft like the AI-10, elite units built for precision and intelligence gathering, and the machinery of modern warfare would all converge in a way this conflict has not yet seen. For now, the world watches closely, waiting to see whether Iran's confident words meet an equally confident American response, or whether both sides continue circling each other from a distance, each calculating the true cost of what a ground invasion would finally bring.